Before I hand over to Fabian, I want to acknowledge that I come to you today from Bunurong country and I pay my respects to the traditional custodians of the lands and waterways that I'm calling from today. And I'd love to hear in chat if you know the traditional country that you're calling from today. As we talk about feedback and conversations that count, I hope we're reminded of and inspired by the thousands-year-old practice of Indigenous yarning circles. Yarning circles are safe places for respectful communication, storytelling, sharing ideas, and where everyone participates on equal standing, and where there's a sense of accountability, honesty, and finding the best ways to solve problems without conflict or blame. So I'd now like to introduce Fabian Dattner, the CEO and founder of Dattner Group. Fabian is one of the world's most influential leadership activists. She's an author, a speaker, and an expert in workplace strategy, culture, and change management. She's the visionary founder and board member of Homeward Bound, and she leads us at Dattner Group with a strong purpose to influence the practice of leadership for a sustainable future. So thank you, Fabian. I'm going to hand to you.
Thank you. Lovely, lovely introduction and lovely welcome to country. I just let everybody know we try to make this a cameras on session for those of you who are coming in now. This is a very big audience, but it's lovely to be able to flick across your faces. We don't care if you're eating, drinking, holding a baby, doing the lawn mowing, going for a walk. We don't care if you're in your pajamas. We truly don't care. What we care most about is seeing your faces and feeling like we're all connected, and particularly in the light of today's topic. I also acknowledge I come from Wurundjeri territory and I look out across the Yarra Valley in Melbourne. And I think, like many thoughtful people in this day and age, we desperately wish that there was some wisdom happening in the practice of leadership globally. My son texted me from America about an hour and a half ago and said, "Did you know that 2,000 rangers across parks in America have just been permanently stood down?" And I thought, poor Mother Earth, poor Mother Earth. Um, I also, I think, I don't know if it was a mistake or the right thing to do, but how many of you like reading novels? Hands up if you're a novel reader. Well, there's a book called Understory, and I think it's Richard Powers who it won the Pulitzer Prize, I think last year. And if it doesn't reframe your sense of the planet, nothing will. It's a novel, but it's seen through the eyes of both activists and the forest that carpets our planet, or should. So it's called Understory. It's a compelling and I think probably a very relevant story of our times. So I welcome you to this conversation, this complex conversation. I am going to do my damnedest to make sure you all leave with something useful in your back pocket, because frankly, it's a shitty time. And I spend probably the third of my time in the Northern Hemisphere, and I just watch how grotesquely incompetent families and workplaces are becoming at having conversations that are foundational to our ability to collaborate. And you all know that I'm very involved globally with the Homeward Bound initiative, and that is a global collaboration of women with a STEM background to elevate the practice of leadership to a sustainable future. And the only reason why we break our backs and do that is because what we've got isn't working. Science is known for 70, 80 years what the solutions are, and still we're thwarting ourselves on the practice and narrative of leadership. And so I want to bring some honesty to you all. I'll do my best on this. I'm going to share some, they say that we often talk about successes. Uh, Oh, it's overstory. Thank you, Zoe has corrected me as someone quoting badly on titles. Zoe has, well, I don't know why I thought of it as understory. It's overstory. There you go. The accurate reference is from our resident literary expert, Zoe Datner. Thanks, Zoe. Um, and I think without exception, in a global community that have dedicated their lives to really understanding what's happening and how we can address it, grief is the number one emotion because they think we've passed a tipping point. And the second one is everyone knows that collaboration, inclusion, legacy mindset are the three most important values for leaders to uphold. And I was in conversation 48 hours ago with a very significant global leader of a very, very significant company saying, oh, I think sustainability's dropped to number 15 on the to-do list for CEOs, and I'm betting it's off the list altogether by the end of the year. And I thought, Jesus, I hope everyone's got Bitcoin because, the rich will get richer and the poor will get the picture. So I'm going to do my best to give you my best on having tricky conversations. And I want to go to slide 3, Chris, and I just want to share some slides with you. I'll come back to you and talk to you, and we'll have a poll. But I just want to share this slide with you because I want to help you understand that actually, and I hope you all know how to slide the screen over so you can still see a lot of people and make the slides smaller. If you hover between the slide and the faces and you're on gallery view, you can slide the screen over so you see each other, but you can watch the slides. And I want to start with, we are in a crisis of praise and positive feedback and an overwhelming tsunami of negative stuff. And what will happen to the human brain when it hears shitty stuff over and over and over again is it goes on high alert because you are deeply wired to be on alert for threat. And, frankly, it probably has served us pretty well and why your gene pool is here today because your ancestors weren't skipping through the primitive daisy fields and singing ancient lullabies. They were actually watching out for someone with a club bigger than theirs. They were watching out for the saber-toothed tiger crouching in the long grass. And the ones who picked it first lasted longest and passed their gene pool on to you. So you are not wired to hear praise, but negative feedback cuts you to the quick. And I assume you all know the term, but it cuts deep. And I can say 10 good things to you. And there's lots of people online today who I love, know, and respect. There's many of you who've done Compass, over half the audience. There's many of you from client companies we work with. And the truth of the matter is, it's negative feedback that we remember because it's a survival strategy, it's a survival pathway. The problem, hands up if you've got children, just very quickly, let me have a little look. Hands up if you've got kids, no people with kids. It looks like 80% of the audience. Well, they are in negative feedback breakdown because it's not happening once a week when the saber-toothed tigers are coming at you from the tundra. It's happening 40 to 50 times a day through social media, and we are not equipped to manage that. And so anxiety, the skyrocketing of anxiety and depression, self-harming, loss of sense of place, wanting to hide away in a bedroom for anyone who knows or has a 13 or 14-year-old girl, your daughter got kidnapped by aliens and, she will come back in about 5 or 6 years, but right now you're struggling with an impossible space. Young boys are, doing lots of stuff equally much, eating disorders skyrocketing, self-esteem issues skyrocketing. And it's like, oh, dear God, what are we doing? So I want to share with you something about if you have to have a ratio and you want to start practicing this with each other, with your families, with your work colleagues, then the next slide, please, Chris. Your ratio is 5 to 1. For every negative piece of information, you need 5 credible, plausible, good pieces of feedback. So a good piece of feedback to all is you got off your asses and you came today. You booked in for this session. You weren't to know whether it would be useful, but you came. Big tick. You're willing to put an hour into thinking and reflecting on the topic. Second big tick. You are willing to learn. Third big tick. You are likely amongst people you know and respect who share a similar intention. Fourth big tick. And the fifth big tick, I'll give it to myself, is potentially you trust us and you know that we are credible in the work that we do. So what we say is helpful. So never forget that to turn into this wonderful, magical, self-actualizing creature who faces into every piece of adversity feeling good and charged up, and your halo is glowing, and your mighty sword and your mighty fire are well in your hands, boy, do you need to feel safe. So why has psychological safety gone through the roof? Because fundamentally we don't feel safe anymore. So psychological needs are shelter, food, air, water, a place to sleep. We're free from threat, which leads to psychological safety. An intrinsic outcome of psychological safety, and often we trade off an opinion or a community that we're not fully aligned with because we feel loved and we belong. And loving and belonging are critically important to the human spirit. And right now, how many people in our world simply don't feel love, don't even know what unqualified love looks like. They don't know where they belong. Do I belong to that radical side? Do I belong to that radical side? What if I'm somewhere in between? How do I express what I want and what I believe in? Oh, well, I'm going to stick to them because at least I know them and I think they love me and I love them. And we know that love and belonging generate self-esteem, and self-esteem is a stepping stone to self-actualizing. And we can't solve most of the big problems we're dealing with unless we get there. So for the big coterie in the room who've either done consulting work with DG or Compass, self-actualizing is where you practice the art of getting things wrong and not being terrified by it. Practice the art of hearing what's not working without undermining your courage and your confidence. So the next slide, please. What I actually want to cover today is it's a really tangled web we weave. Everyone online, almost without exception, and I'm going to share some of my stuff from a couple of weeks ago, unwittingly create problems around us. And particularly if we're stressed or tired or not necessarily mindful of how vulnerable it is, how vulnerable people feel, and how important trust is. I want to share 2 stories of entanglement. I want to show you how to get untangled and the 3 P's of mastery. And there will be no bullshit in this. I'm going to give you the tried and true, and you're going to hate me because you go, I know, Fabi. You've heard that before. Well, the only reason why I'm saying it again is people say they know it, but they then don't do it. There's someone online today who our company has worked with for a couple of years, and she and I have not quite made a connection, which is very unusual for me. The relationship we have with those of you we work with is the backbone of what we do. And in January, we made a connection, and you will know who you are. And suddenly the dialogue and the way we were communicating tipped into empathy, humor, and kindness. And I hope she felt this too, but I felt this wash of gratitude for the humanity of our interaction. And what it brings to me is an overwhelming desire to do better. And that's what happens when we connect properly. And I'm going to show you how brutally disconnected we, good people, all of us, can do to others. So I'm going to go to Chris, and we're going to get you to do a poll because you all know that we like you to be active in what we do. So it's not a passive experience, and we want you to see what people in the group are thinking. So, Chris,
Thanks,
over to
Fabe.
you.
I've
Fear
just
and how things play out.
Yeah, I've just popped up a QR code. So grab your phone and you can scan that, or you can go to menti.com and use the code on the screen. And then once everyone's got that, I can share the results live.
Chris, can we show the growing slide?
Yep, I'm just getting that up now.
Where text in white is tricky. I think that might be it, Chris. Is that right?
Yeah, there's a few more coming in, but it looks like there are some standouts there. Being judged, not
I'm
being
gonna I'm gonna work my way through those. I just
great.
do you think that's all of them in, or are we still going?
There are some coming in. We've got about 100 now, so
I'm eating a mouthful of Irish stew, which I made on the weekend camping. It's delicious. Okay, so being judged. Uh, I don't think it will surprise you to know that that's one of the worst things that can happen to us and causes us to become aggressive or passive if we think we're being judged. Now, that doesn't mean we are being judged, but if we think we're being judged, it is such a fearful thing because it's excluding us when what we need is love and belonging. And remember, love and belonging comes from feeling safe, and feeling safe comes from basic psychological needs being met. So when you feel judged, Maslow's hierarchy of need locks into place, and you need to be very skilled at understanding what's triggering you into being judged and how to deal with it. And most people, even when they know what's being triggered, have not put the work in to manage that. The second highest there is not being good enough. And not being good enough, in many ways, is a subset of being judged. And that starts in families, not being good enough to a father or mother who's super competitive. Two children in one family, one becomes hyper competitive and the other one becomes a good kid, a passive, defensive child. It's very hard to produce a deeply constructive human being in a family where I never felt that who I was good enough. And then not getting things right, which is the insanity of being judged and not being good enough, is the net effect is I come to believe that I haven't got things right. And it's so counterproductive to progress. Progress is predicated on the assumption that you have the space and time to make mistakes. So, can we stop sharing for a moment? Anyone want to say anything about what popped up just then on screen? Surprised? Agree? Could see yourself there? Hands up if you were surprised. Just pop your hands up if you were surprised at the list. Couple of people. Hands up who were not surprised. That list made sense to you. Have any of you ever heard of anthropophobia? It's the fear of being watched. It's why people get stage fright. It's actually a significant entree to feeling like you're being judged. So being watched is a precursor to being judged. Um, Making eye contact, because the eye is the only direct sense into the brain. There it is, right in front of you. And eye contact means you might see me and I might see you. Uh, Not being loved or being lovable. How many of us, not knowing unqualified love, don't know, you haven't come to know that you are incredibly lovable as you are. In fact, for any of our neurodiverse participants, that constant criticism for neurodiversity, and yet we know it's a significant portion of everyone in the room today. Hands up who are comfortable saying, I consider myself to be or have been diagnosed as neurodiverse. So there's a smattering of you, and I suspect it's probably more than that. Uh, Not being included, the most painful thing, because again, it's fear of being outcast. So not being included is a very big issue. Losing control, because I need to stay in control of my emotions, what I'm doing. And if I lose control, you will think less of me. Losing status, that positional power thing. I need the title, I need the office, I need the car, I need the home, I need the clothing. Because if I lose status, then I'm not sure I know who I am without that status. A significant one for a number of you, and if for those of you who've done format, particularly those of you who've done Compass, not understanding or following the rules and getting into trouble for it. Some people don't do it deliberately, just the rules don't mean the same thing to them. Fairness is a big plug in. A lot of you will have fairness as something you'll ruminate at night time. It wasn't fair. That's not fair. They weren't fair. He's not fair. She's not fair. Relatability, a big trigger during COVID as we tried to avoid each other. If you were walking in your 5 kilometer radius and you wanted to avoid a stranger, and we would walk 6 feet apart for fear of catching COVID from them. And so you didn't really know who to relate to. People coming towards you, you had to make a snap decision, friend or foe. And finally, I'm not sure if it landed on the final list, but autonomy, again, a COVID trigger, is what it's like to feel like you're losing the right to choose, and you will give more, you'll contribute more, you'll participate more, providing you have a degree of autonomy in what you do. So comments in the chat room. What are your comments about that? Just let's see what's turning up in the chat room. We've got Honouring Country, which is wonderful. So comment in the chat room. Any of you can pop a message into the chat room now about first reactions on what triggers us. Let's just get some thoughts into the chat. Not being heard, significant one. Yes, good. Susie, we know it well. Stripping of autonomy and lack of consultation just undermines the gravitas and scale of your contribution. Shame can be a huge issue, Annette, and shame in a clinical setting is very different from guilt. Guilt is a big motivator. Guilt is, I let you down, I did the wrong thing, I feel guilty. But shame is, I did the wrong thing, I'm a bad person. So that's heartbreaking. Exhausted trying to keep everyone happy, yes. Giving effective feedback very difficult when you have to somehow overcome all these feelings in person. So you're providing the feedback effectively and who you're giving it to. Fear of an explosive response, of course, get that, and particularly if that was part of your family narrative. The concept of autonomy is interesting, super interesting. It's one that is a trigger for me personally. Thank you, Kim. Good to see you online. Kim, thinking about giving feedback, these feelings are not going to inspire anyone to be their best. Correct, 100%. So I just want to share a couple of stories myself. One is about something I did wrong, and something is about having the courage to give another leader, a very senior leader, feedback that I think she desperately needed to hear. And this was both in an international context for me. And like everyone, I have people that I can give feedback to easily. I'd like to think I'm probably better at giving feedback given I've dedicated my life to it than many. But, your fears will scale up often as your influence scales up. And so I find myself working in more complex environments with more senior people, and bam, there's my concern. So one is a leader who's the global head of strategy, marketing, and sales for another very big international organization. And she's someone I've loved, respected, and mentored for a long time. And she's found herself in an organization that's very male dominated. Some might say misogynistically so, that women often feel like second-class citizens. And there she is sitting at the executive table in a pole position to influence the culture. And she and I have had multiple conversations about what is possible for her. And then about 3 weeks ago, I called her on it. And I was quite nervous to do it to begin with because she's so good. But I have finally said, what is stopping you from being the leader you want to be or that you see in yourself? And we had a different conversation about her then and there persona. You're worrying about what you know, cognitive functioning, technically what you're expert at, and you're selling yourself short on your leadership. You are unarguably one of the best leaders I've met, but you're allowing your own environment to rob you of that voice, to take away that voice. And I gave her a parallel of another person, another organization, not as skilled as this individual is, not as technically competent, but who was fearless in the use of his voice. And I said, this is what has happened in the same time frame. He's done this, he's got this outcome for these people. And my question to her is, where are you with the three things around culture and people that really matter to you? And at that moment, the penny dropped with her that you don't have to challenge something by being confrontational, which is, I would have considered her very skilled at this, but challenge things that you don't agree with, you must do. You have to find your voice to say, I just want to bring to your attention the following. Your own fear that that's going to turn into something horrible, often ill-founded or based on a childhood experience, silences your wisdom, silences the opportunity to improve the practice of leadership. Leaders in significant powers of authority don't hear the truth. Some of you will know we have a new diagnostic. Some of you will have done it, called the Diamond Power Index. And we can show leaders that despite your growth orientation, despite your sense of purpose, despite your belief that you have everything you need to be successful, and the fact that you are open to feedback, that is not what people are giving you. If you are in the top one or two layers of the organization, we can guarantee people are not sharing the truth with you no matter what you say. And there is a huge amount of research on this, and they don't tell you the truth for good reason. It's not safe to do that. Oh, I'm easy to give feedback to. Are you? How do you know you're easy to give feedback to? My door's always open. That's got nothing to do with giving feedback. Feedback is an expression of curiosity, of humility, of being vulnerable, being open, being curious, high order listening skills. Where are you actually coming from? Are you getting feedback and then arguing with it, trying to prove why the person giving you feedback is wrong? You'd be surprised how often that happens, even with incredibly experienced people. You defend yourself. You resist the feedback because if you accept feedback, you may be accepting that you did something wrong. And when you accept that you did something wrong, then now you're afraid you're going to be judged. Now you're afraid you're going to be judged. Bam, down we go into fulfilling psychological needs, no matter how senior you are. And, to executive teams all over the world now, I'm saying build the skill to take feedback, to give feedback, but you have to have the will to do it. We live in such a fundamentally unsafe world that if you're not investing time and effort into that, then you're hearing a fraction of the intelligence that you could be hearing about whether things are working or not. So that was the first story, was about this leader and my own reticence, my own, I spent a long time helping her. There's an important piece for me, a building block of business that we've got together. It's not happening. I can see why it's not happening. It's sad and it's frustrating. And part of my brain was going, well, maybe it's just not going to happen. And until I clicked over, it's because I'm not being honest with her. I'm not telling her what I see. Now, I could be wrong. And in giving feedback, you have to be willing to be wrong. But if you don't give the feedback, you're preempting your fear of the consequence of giving feedback for fear of causing conflict. And unknowingly, you're causing conflict because the truth is not getting through. So you've got this horrible entanglement. I can see something's not working. I know through my experience and body of knowledge what you could be doing. I'm not saying it, for instance, because I want you to like me. And into the tangled web we go. The second story, a much more complex story, with a group of leaders in the Northern Hemisphere, a women's program. And some of you are online, I can see, and will know the event and the experience. So there's nothing wrong with making mistakes. It's not the mistakes that define you, it's how you deal with the mistakes. It's not getting it right all the time. There's no championing, no victory prize for always being right, except briefly in high school. What there is value in, and science is built on this premise, you put a theory or a hypothesis forward and you seek to disprove it. And the scientist who stops being curious about why they're wrong stops being effective in improving what they do. Same is true for everybody else. That if we are resistant to making mistakes and owning up to it, then what we're saying is we're resistant to learning. So I was running this program. It looked on screen a bit like this. We had 40 odd people on screen, and I had a dual task. I was helping a group of leaders who are developing the skill to run this program in their own right, and I was watching the audience. And in a moment, and you can look at Camille's face. Camille's the one I can see. Uh, watch her face, and you'll see her grinning when I share the story. In a moment of idiocy on my part, Maureen's here as well, I said something that was really wrong. And I called uh, a member of the audience to stop talking. Just stop asking so many questions. And I knew this particular member of the audience was deeply constructive, and I knew she would hear it constructively. What I didn't pay attention to was the faces of the other women and people in the audience. And the context is she was asking question after question after question. I was doing my best to facilitate, and by about the fourth or fifth question, I said, "Lola, can you stop now? You can just stop, stop. No, no, listen to me, just stop. Let someone else have a question." And in principle, that sounded fine inside my head, but what it felt like for the audience, for some of the audience anyway, oh my God, Fabi's being so rude. That's so inappropriate. She would have hurt that person's feelings. She would have, and so trust in that moment drops. I dance my way through the afternoon, and I'm also working with facilitators who are learning about something. And I then called a facilitator on something that I believed they were doing wrong. But instead of calling it in a way that would really help them in the moment, I called it in a way that made them lose their confidence. I didn't really digest either of those events till the end of the day. At the end of the day, of course, everything was great. The team had done a fabulous job. They are a remarkable collection of women. And our audience are brilliant women from Peru, Mexico, North America. And I go, yay, well done, everyone. I went to give one of the facilitators a big hug, a woman I love and know well, and she seemed reticent because you sure as hell don't want to be hugged by a person who's just breached trust, do you? And she pulled back, and I said, are you okay? And she was looking at another facilitator sitting next to me. I turned around and looked at her, and she looked like she had sucked a lemon. She looked so upset. And I said, what's going on? I've missed something. And then the person to my right says, you were really rude today, Fab. And I've been worrying about it, fearful that if I tell you, it's going to damage our relationship. So can you see now what's happening? A tangled web is emerging. I'm unaware. I've made a big mistake in the program. It's affected the audience, but it's also affected the facilitators. We then debrief that for nearly an hour. I offer absolute unqualified apology. And we settle down and we establish trust and love between us. And I then say something that changed the program, I think. I said, you know, I made that mistake in public. I think I should apologize tomorrow morning in public. I think I should share it with people because that's how I feel. And again, up went the fear in the room that it would make the problem bigger than, more complex than. But actually what happened the next morning when I apologized is it was like lifting a weight off people's shoulders. Suddenly we were talking about the issue and what happened and who felt what and how other people didn't feel anything and how unaware I was. And I got the facilitators to talk about how they felt and where it went. And we were able to show people when you don't give feedback in a trusting way to people, it creates this tangled psychological web and we retreat from one another. And my best metaphor you is to imagine you've got an artery to your heart and a bit of detritus sticks to the side wall of the artery, then more things will gather around that piece of shit in your artery until one day your artery blows up. And the same thing happens with human beings that can't have those conversations where we give each other honest feedback. For me, it's that perennial lesson in my career about being aware of how my style comes across to other people. But it's also a lesson in help people to have the conversations that matter. And I'm going to get, well, first I'm just going to see, give me a thumbs up if this is making sense so far. Is it helpful to hear a story of where I cocked up as an example? Yes. Okay, good. So you're not going to like the solution. There are two slides I'm going to show you about the solution, and it's going to irritate you. Both of them will irritate you. Uh, and before I show them to you, imagine you want to play guitar and you currently don't know how to. In the chat, tell me how you would begin. You've bought a guitar, that's all you've done. How are you going to go from buying a guitar to beginning to learn how to play it? Ask Mr. Google, yes. Holding it's a very good. Finding a Google teacher, finding a teacher. Look up resources online, get lessons, find a teacher, strum it, good beginning. Book a lesson, watch YouTube, find some calls and use them. Watch videos. So that's a legitimate strategy, but there are two things missing from this. And that is how you go from, and it's why we fail at diets, it's why we don't take up exercise, is you've got to be in it for the long haul. It's not a quick fix. A guitar is a very beautiful, some would say complex instrument, but you can get wonderful sounds out of it by tuning it accurately and learning to play F, C, and G on a guitar. That'll already bring, in one combination or another, probably 2,000 catchy little rock and roll folk songs to your table. But if you want to go past that, you have to add a layer of knowledge on. And to stick at something, to stick at exercise, to stick at an instrument, to stick at a language, you've got to do slide 9, please, Chris. Slide 9. You have to be able to answer the first question. Why am I, no, back a slide, that's back a slide, Chris. Why am I doing it? What am I trying to achieve? Why am I doing it? What is the it I am trying to achieve? The two things that happened for me a couple of weeks ago, I couldn't walk past because the why for what I do is all consuming. It is the reason I get out of bed in the morning. It is the reason we do these calls with you. We think helping you with the practice of leadership is the single most important contribution we can make to a sustainable future. It's the single most important thing we can do. When I make a mistake as a leader, all I want to know is how can I correct that mistake? How can I learn from what I did? Because my purpose is always clear in my head. If you don't know why you are trying to do something or trying to achieve something, stop. Stop. Write it down. Find a way to write down what is the it I or we are trying to achieve. Don't critique a meeting. Don't critique a piece of feedback from an organization. Don't critique a strategy until you are absolutely crystal clear on why we are doing this. What is the it we are trying to achieve? I'm trying to achieve. A leader must match the organization's sense of why. If a leader mismatches that, then it's always an uphill battle to hear the truth. The second thing is, am I aware of what I'm thinking and feeling and how it affects how I behave? So I do a retrospective on this episode a couple of weeks ago and saying things that upset some people, it made me feel sick. I love people. My whole life is dedicated to trying to help them. So when I make a mistake, it's awful. I hate it. I hate doing something that would hurt another human being. It's against everything I believe in. So I'm aware when I've done that, I will ruminate. And I feel better when I go, okay, I'm ruminating. I don't want to ruminate. I want to move through to a constructive thought and a constructive feeling. What I might say to myself, I'm very clear on the why of what I do, elevating the visibility of leadership for a sustainable future. If I make a mistake, I don't feel comfortable. I don't like it. All right, How am I going to approach this constructively? I want to feel calm. I want to feel kind. I want to feel thoughtful. So how am I going to help the other people? How do I bring my emotional state into a helpful place that says, now I know how to help? Well, I better listen to them. I better think about how I'm going to help that situation and coach it. And I hope I can always do it through the lens of kindness and compassion. And finally, can I answer the question, which I don't think leaders actually even ask themselves? Do I have a positive regard for other people? You can't help people that you don't like. It's very hard to do it. Or you help them, but they feel that you don't like them. So you trigger down to psychological safety, undermine trust. If you are working with or around people, then having a positive regard for them is central, caring about them. So finally, last little slide, the 3 Ps of getting it right. And that beautiful saying, amateurs practice until they get it right, professionals practice until they can't play it wrong. 3 Ps, practice, practice, practice. I'm sure a lot of you have done LSI. Hands up if you've done LSI somewhere in your journey. I think that's a lot of you have done LSI. So LSI could keep you going and learning for a decade, for a decade. And if you got your results and didn't go back and look, then you are absolutely not practicing. It's just a bit of misplaced intellectual curiosity and it'll go. If you don't practice within the first 48 hours to 7 days of receiving feedback on that scale, it goes into random access. You won't have that information at your fingertips. Somewhere between 48 hours and 7 days, you reread material that you're getting feedback on. You re-listen to feedback you're getting. When you get to the 7 day mark, then 7 to 28 days, you have to have a mechanism to refresh it for each of those days or every 2 or 3 days. At the end of that cycle, the information will go on to medium memory and it will last anywhere from 3 months to 6 months. And if you don't do anything to practice or recall it in that time frame, it won't embed itself. But a little bit of practice done regularly builds the skill. A little bit of practice done regularly, relentlessly, always builds the skill. So we all have to stop complaining about how bad things are in our world, and we have to start practicing getting it right. We have to practice to communicate differently. 2 words from you all in the chat room. How do you feel about that precious hour together in the chat so I can see what you think about that?
Faber, Susie had a question in the chat. Any tips for dealing with leadership who don't have a regard for people?
Yes, deal with your own practice first. Deal with who you are first. Have a look at who you are first. Have a look at your triggers. You can't change someone else, but you can change how you respond. Thank you, Susie. Common sense. I need to get back to shore. LSI. If any of you need to retest LSI, let us know. Feeling reflective, good. What is the why we are trying to achieve? What is the why I am trying to achieve? Thank you, Annette. It always makes me feel happy to see your face in the audience. I'm a bit confused, Sophie. I'm a bit confused with honest conversations. If someone doesn't like you, as you said, it's hard to achieve anything with people that don't like you. Well, yes and no. I didn't say working with people who don't like you. I said you need to like them. So it's easy to love the ones you love. Can you love the ones you don't love? It's easy to love the ones you like. Can you work with the people you don't like? And that's a skill and that's practice. And in time, suddenly they become safe with you and they will come to your table because you changed who you were with them. I understand it's not easy. I never said it was. And the most, as somebody says, Rick Hammond said, the most challenging relationships are often the ones we end up being most thankful for. 100% where you learn. So I just want to finish on a note because it's shocks me sometimes that people don't actually know what we do. So I'm going to get Chris, can you put up the second last slide, my love? So for anyone in an organization, second last slide, Chris. Slide before that one.
Sorry,
Sorry,
Faye.
I don't have that slide, Fabe. I'm just going to try and get get it from Sarah.
Okay. So in essence, well, then you can stop sharing. There are values, but we have 70% of what we do is long range transformational consulting. And I mean transformational. We help leaders and organizations constantly refine and think through what are you trying to achieve? Why are we doing this? Is this working? What are the peripherals around that that need work? And typically, you have a culture strategy map, you have perpetual executive development, you have second and third tier leadership investment. And eventually, when that's well in play, you start to engage the broad community. The second one is coaching, which is a direct offshoot of consulting. And that's all sorts of coaching. It's programmatic coaching from our point of view, but we're passionate about helping individuals and small groups of leaders, triad or group coaching, to understand themselves and others better. And so you have to understand the context you're working in. You have to understand other people, and the pathway to that is to understand yourself best and first. And finally, of course, as many of you know, we do a huge amount of work with and for women. And in fact, Chris, we have a program coming. The dates for that are
We have an online program for Compass starting in June, and we also have our Compass Advanced retreats in May and October this year.
so the Compass Advance we've added in the last 18 months is for more senior leaders who really want the space to understand power and influence, and who need and recognize the incredible power of a collaboration on initiatives that we're trying to play with in our lives, from big ones to small ones. So it's a 3-day retreat in a very beautiful part of New South Wales. So,
And
are there any questions that you'd like to ask? You're welcome to stay on. Got to go. Bye, Julia. Thank you. Thank you. Um, and she also said someone had a hand up in the room, which I missed.
I think it was Taryn.
Taryn, if you're still here, you're most welcome to ask your question.